By 1940s, the World War II was in full swing. Bombings were being carried out and people were dying. The British had declared India a belligerent nation without consulting the Indian opinion, which has created widespread anger. In protest to this move, the Congress ministries in the provinces had resigned. The Congress, at its Varda session, clarified its stance that it stood firmly against Nazism and fascism, but saw India's inclusion into an imperial war without consultation unfair. In this time, India saw another national upsurge, and it was the Quit India movement, which is also known as August Kranti or August Revolution. Hello, this is Neil, and today we'll be discussing about the Quit India movement. The causes for movement were basically five. First, that India has political awareness for years now, and struggle experience as well. If we go back into history, India saw the national consciousness being built in the late 19th century. After the 1857 revolt, India's national consciousness started taking its shape, and we saw multiple movements throughout the first half of 20th century, which was the Swadeshi movement, then we had the non-cooperation movement, and then we had the civil disobedience movement. Secondly, India's declaration as a belligerent power without consulting the Indian opinion. And third was a very peculiar one, and it has been seen in many countries around the world whenever the country fights a war. The socioeconomic conditions of a country worsens because it needs food supplies and other commodities for the soldiers fighting at front line. The prices go up, and the normal production cycles are also disrupted, which further adds to the inflation. You need money to fight the war, and thus there are collection of funds. In India, there was coercive sale of war bonds and forcible collection of funds. At the same time, we also had a scarcity crisis. The prices of food commodities had gone up, and in 1943, India also saw the Great Bengal famine. The fourth reason was the failure of Cripps mission. The Cripps mission was sent in 1942 to negotiate a settlement with Indians and to enlist India's support for the war. This mission was sent because of encouragement from the world leaders like Franklin D. Roosevelt and Chiang Kai-shek, the Chinese leader, who wanted the Indian question to be solved so that India can support the allied powers in the war. But this mission failed. There were many reasons to it. It wasn't given enough time. Churchill wasn't sincere for its success, and it offered dominion status, while India had already declared that its demand was Purn Swaraj in the 1929 resolution of Lahore. With all this and the war, there was a rising mood of militancy. There were stories of British defeat in Southeast Asia and how they had abandoned Indians to their condition when the Japanese invaded. There was the fear of Japanese invasion to India. They had already bombed Vishakhapatnam and Kokonada, the coastal towns, and Japanese propaganda machine was pushing relentless anti-British propaganda in India. The British treatment of Indians to keep them in dark was also a case in point. The British burned the boats so that the fishermen wouldn't venture out into the sea and they would find out what's happening out there. This was one such scenario, and there were others as well. This popular mood of militancy was sensed by Gandhiji as well, and he himself, seeing the condition of India, was in a militant mood. In the summer of 1942, he writes, "Leave India to God. If that is too much to ask, then leave her to anarchy. This audit discipline anarchy should go, and if there is complete lawlessness, I would risk it." The Quit India resolution was passed on 8th of August 1942, proposed to begin a mass civil disobedience under Gandhi's direction, if power was not delivered immediately to Indians. On this occasion, Gandhiji delivered his famous speech, the Do or Die speech, in which he said that either we should attain freedom or die trying. As expected, the British were on the toes and all front-ranking leaders were arrested early in the morning. They were already having a bad time fighting the Japanese and the Germans, so they didn't want to take any risks, and all front-ranking leaders were arrested. Aruna Asaf Ali, a comparatively younger leader of the Indian National Congress, hoisted the national flag at Gowalia Tank, and that marked the beginning of Quit India movement. Gandhiji had already said that henceforth everyone should consider themselves as free man or woman. Free man or woman should choose their own course of action if the leaders were arrested. And this is what happened. The leaders were arrested, and what followed was an intense rebellion or an intense movement. There were many streams to it, and the intensity was so high that it sent the British government into a frenzy. Linlithgow, who was the viceroy at the time, described it as by far the most serious rebellion since 1857. This intensity also earned the name of August Revolution. This is the August Kranti Maidan, where the flag was hoisted and the movement actually began. This is the memorial that had been erected to remember this great moment. In the course of the movement, historian Sumit Sarkar has identified three phases. First was the urban revolt, which was basically strikes, boycott, and picketing. This was suppressed easily by the British. They didn't have much trouble dealing with these parts. The real trouble began in the second and the third phases, when the movement shifted from the urban centers to the rural areas, which were basically less governed and less understood. And the ideology of the movement shifted from the strikes and boycotts and picketing to violent sabotage activities. In the next two phases, there was peasant rebellion and national governments established in villages, and violent activities of sabotaging the war efforts by dislocating and damaging communication lines. And all these activities were coordinated by an underground radio station run by Usha Mehta, a congresswoman herself, which she said that the radio station is present somewhere in India. This is the picketing picture at Bangalore Medical College. Picketing was one of the most important aspects of the Gandhian form of struggle. And this was seen in the urban revolt. This was common throughout the national movement. They would basically go somewhere and sit so that the whole organization becomes dysfunctional or non-functional. As the central leadership was absent now, there are three important leaders. There were others as well, but three important leaders who showed three different types of ideological inclinations. There was a radical group under leadership of Jayaprakash Narayan organizing guerrilla warfare at the Indo-Nepal border. A centrist group led by Congress socialists like Aruna Asaf Ali. She even disobeyed Gandhiji's directions to surrender. And a Gandhian group led by Sucheta Kriplani, which continued with the picketing, the boycott, and the constructive social program, as was envisaged in Gandhi's vision. The Quit India movement saw different variations in different regions. For example, in Bihar, there was a Patna Secretariat incident in which students basically 12 to 16-year-old students were trying to hoist a flag at the Patna Secretariat building, and they were shot upon, they were fired upon, and many of them died. This was one of the most brutal incidents of the 1942 Quit India movement. Then there was formation of Azad Dastas, which were basically guerrilla bands. They were active in South Bihar and they actively took part in sabotage activities. But later on, it's being said that they also joined the dacoit groups, and which was not a very good thing. They became problem for the law and order. In UP, Chittu Pandey, a Gandhian leader, was made Swaraj Ziladhish. In English, it would be called the Independent District Magistrate. The original British magistrate who was there by the government, appointed by the government, was forcefully removed from his office. But this was all short-lived because the next day the army came and no one knew what to do now. In Bengal and Maharashtra, we saw an important thing, and it was the establishment of parallel governments. These were not feudal governments, which was run by a feudal lord. They had sophisticated organization, they collected taxes, and they had different branches in their organization. The Swaraj Panchayat at Kontai, the Tamralipta Jatiya Sarkar had a volunteer corps, like Vidyut Bahini. The Tamralipta Jatiya Sarkar was established in Tamluk, Bengal. And in Maharashtra, we had Satara Prati Sarkar, which had Seva Dals and Tufan Dals, and also a court which was called Nyayadan Mandal, which settled disputes of local matter. Seva Dal was basically for service and Tufan Dal was for security. This is the Saeed Smarak, which was created to commemorate as a remembrance memorial. It is present in Patna. This shows students going to hoist the flag. Some were being shot, but they still march on. As we discussed, the British were on the toes. They were already having a tough time fighting the war, so they were not taking any risks. The British took advantage of its wartime powers and suppressed the movement brutally, often utilizing brutal methods like whipping of suspects and burning entire villages. Sometimes they were also fired upon from airplanes. High fines were imposed and nearly 60,000 were arrested. The brutal repression suppressed the mass phase of the struggle, but the underground movement consolidated and it kept going. And many leaders sustained it, like Jayaprakash Narayan, Sucheta Kriplani, Ram Manohar Lohia, Achyut Patwardhan, and Biju Patnaik. Bipan Chandra on suppression. Bipan Chandra would say about suppression that the martial law hadn't been proclaimed, but army often did without any reference to direct officers. The repression was as severe as it would be under martial law. I repeat, the martial law hadn't been proclaimed, but army, though nominally working under civilian authorities, often did what it wanted without any reference to direct officers. The repression was as severe as it would be under martial law. Despite the repression, underground activities continued on under various leaders. Now we come to the significance of this movement. First of all, it was a widespread movement and nationwide popularity. We also saw cross-caste and intercommunity harmony, which was absent in earlier movement. Yes, there were some instances of riots, but they were mostly limited. On a larger scale, it was peaceful and harmonic. The Congress emerged as a major player and figured prominently in the later negotiations. The new generation of freedom fighters emerged, Aruna Asif Ali and Jayaprakash Narayan, who continued to play an important role even after the independence. The British learned that post-war India can't be governed by force and showed greater willingness to negotiate. Towards independence. In the later lecture, we would discuss about the various plans proposed by the British to break the constitutional deadlock and have a face-saving exit from India. We'll discuss the politics of partition and events culminating into Direct Action Day and the aftermath, and at the end, we'll discuss the transfer of power. Thank you.